Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 425 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Eilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our fifth book just came out for Christmas. It's called Perseverance and How to Be a Great Fraternity or Sorority Alumnus. So go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, our team at Middle Tennessee State University is wrapping up a 3-year grant that is worth over $1 million to help folks get into treatment for opioid use disorder. And the medically assisted treatment for opioid use disorder is just so very expensive. So a big pool of that money we got through the grant went to the uninsured to help them get the treatment that they need, as well as free rides from Uber using our codes on their phone to help get them to the treatment facilities and back when they don't have transportation in a rural setting. So I want you to remember all of these challenges when you are helping folks in their recovery journey. So speaking of recovery, let's talk to our next guest about recovery and healing. Dr. Andrea Arlington received her doctorate in consciousness studies from the Emerson Theological Institute and is a religious science minister with over 10 years of service in her spiritual community. She is a certified ICF Life Coach, a family recovery coach, daring Way Facilitator, based on author and researcher Brené Brown's work. She is a speaker, author, online course developer, a mother, and a grandmother. She has personally guided thousands of clients through healing toxic family relationships and issues related to addiction by teaching research-based tools and strategies to create a connection in recovery. Dr. Andrea hopes to bring her seasoned expertise to the masses. And also, she has a forthcoming book. I want you to pay attention for this. When she releases it, I think it's going to be incredible. And that front cover is amazing. It's called Revelations of a Bad Mom, A Journey of Loving Your Child into Recovery and Healing Your Family. Welcome to the show, Dr. Andrea.
Thank you so much. It's really, really a pleasure to be here.
Hey, it is my pleasure. Your story was just absolutely phenomenal. And, when I saw this whole thing from start to finish, I'm like, I have to get her on the show to talk about this. I mean, this is just like, what a journey you've had. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. All right. So let's talk about it. I mean, I think, really kind of the first really big influential thing in your life was a really, really sad moment because at age 21, you lost your brother Ben to addiction. Tell our audience, what was Ben like growing up and what happened with Ben?
Well, Ben was the cutest kid on the face of this planet besides my grandchildren. I don't know if your listeners believe in soulmates, but my little brother Ben, he was 4 years younger than me, and we were like soulmates from the time he was born. And unfortunately, in my home of origin, my family of origin, there was a lot of tension and conflict and anxiety. My dad was a professor. He was climbing the academic ladder. He worked 7 days a week. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom with 3 kids. And she had a lot of anxiety, and she had, I think she was very lonely and not a happy person. And so the home itself felt dark and cold, and even though 5 people lived in it, none of us were really emotionally connected, except for my brother Ben and I, and our 2 little dachshunds. We were blessed to have them. But what happened was, that there was a lot of internal conflict for me, and I wasn't one to be quiet about my feelings. And so I was very demanding for attention and for connection. And if I couldn't get it from a positive, in a positive way, I was going to get it somehow. And so I became very loud about how I felt about my dad and my mom, and was angry because I didn't get the connection that I saw my friends get from their parents. And so by the time I was 14, I moved out. And that was after I had been through therapy for a bit and was medicated for a bit. And, my younger brother saw the conflict. I was the one who was the loudest about the injustices I felt in the family, I guess, if you will. And so when I moved out, I know that was very traumatic for him. It was for me as well, and probably for my parents, but nobody talked about it, you know? And I tried to stay in as close a touch as I could with him. He was 10 at the time, and I know that, he started self-medicating when he was in middle school, just like I had. And by the time he was 16, he had reached out to me at one point and said that he was struggling with cocaine use. And unfortunately, at the time, so was I. My brother had asked my dad if he would send him to some sort of alcohol recovery program, because my brother was uncomfortable talking about what was really going on, which was IV cocaine use. And he didn't tell me that part, because I probably would have been more inclined to take more action. But, my dad, when my brother asked him to send him to an alcohol recovery program, my dad said, if you have a problem drinking too much, you should just pour your beer out in the back of a planter at parties and fill the bottle with water and pretend that you're drinking, and then just don't. And, that was his best solution. And of course, that didn't help with what was really going on with my brother. And in his 16th year, he was in multiple accidents with his bicycle that were likely drug related. At one point, he actually had to have plastic surgery because he landed on his face in gravel. And by the time he was 17, um, things were so out of control that he ended up driving one night when he shouldn't have been behind the wheel, and he ended up dying. And um, that's when my parents, for the first time, went into his bedroom. I don't know how long it had been, but they found all the needles and the paraphernalia. And you know yes, it was a huge loss for everybody. I know my mom never got over it, and my parents never talked about my brother again after he died. And 12 years later, when my mom died, my dad told me that they had never talked about Ben since his funeral. And I know my mom lived with that terrible trauma inside and never got support for the grief, and just I think the biggest takeaway for people who might be hearing this story is, if you are struggling with substance use disorder and you don't feel safe talking to your parents or somebody close to you, please find a school counselor. Talk to a friend's parent, talk to an aunt or an uncle, but don't try to deal with this on your own, because that doesn't work. And if you're a family member or even a friend who has somebody approach you and say, hey, I'm struggling right now, listen underneath what they're saying, because by the time they come to you telling you that they have a problem, they are in dire straits probably. And they're going to minimalize it because it's really uncomfortable to talk about. So when I say listen deeply, I'm just asking you to recognize that there's probably a lot more that they're not sharing with you, and they need help.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that message. I can't even imagine the trauma that your mom and your dad went through, what you went through, and getting help at the counseling center, especially for all the college students who are listening. You're
Mhm.
paying for those counselors in that counseling center. So really take advantage of those resources and get in there and have a conversation. I certainly understand how difficult it can be to, just kind of lay it all out on the table for your parents. So I understand maybe why there would be some hesitancy to do that. But there are people that do want to help. So I completely encourage you to to take advantage of those counseling centers as much as possible. And you can kind of start to see that this is kind of a generational thing, this generational trauma that was going through your family, because your daughter also, she was battling a heroin addiction. So how did that addiction with your daughter, how did that also impact your family?
Well, so coming to clarity as a parent or a family member at all, in general, with a loved one who's struggling with substances, like at first you go, oh, that was weird. That smell is weird. That tinfoil with the black lines on it in the bathroom. What is that? Oh, it's just your eye makeup that you're burning so that it's softer. You can get the it to apply better. Oh, okay. You sort of justify and deny what you're really seeing and smelling and hearing, and so it takes time before a person sometimes even is willing to see what's going on. And I had all sorts of signs and clues that I ignored, um, and I think that's common. So again, don't ignore what you're seeing, and it really wasn't until she was standing in front of the judge and I heard her say, I am a heroin addict. That's when it really landed.
Mm.
And, thank God she was coached by her attorney to say that, because both her attorney and the judge had, decades of recovery underneath each of them. And the judge told her attorney, you need to tell your client that if she doesn't come up to me and tell me that, she's facing 6 years in prison for her second felony, and she's 19 years old, and I don't want her to go to prison. I want her to go to treatment. And so he sentenced her to a year in treatment and 3 years of probation, where she had to test clean. And thank God for that. I mean, that was a life-saving moment for her. So, in terms of how it affected our family, I mean, it was a gradual unraveling of what was already not great. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but you know, it took time, and as that time progressively moved forward before that moment in front of the judge, we were struggling financially, we were struggling emotionally, mentally. Um, my marriage was really on the rocks, and my younger daughter was being ignored because the demands of a parent, when another child is struggling with anything, any kind of illness, mental health, physical illness, or addiction, the other children often get neglected. And my youngest daughter really was neglected.
Mm. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that as well. And I mean, thank goodness for the judge to show some mercy there and just get your daughter into treatment. I think that's one of the things that we're doing here in Middle Tennessee too, is, we've really created one of the first diversion centers in the state of Tennessee, where if you're picked up on a first-time drug charge and you're nonviolent, instead of going to jail here in Tennessee, you're actually going to go to our diversion center, and there you're going to get the treatment that you need. It's just that you're sick and you just need to get help. I
Yeah.
mean, that's really all that it is. And so, the fact that we were able to do that and get that diversion center up and running in a very conservative part of the country, to say
Wow.
mildly, was really impressive. And so that's one of the things that I'm super proud of, that we were able to get done. And it seems like this judge also had a similar mindset, which is, let's just get her some help. Let's just get her the treatment that she needs. She's not a bad person. She's sick. That's it. I mean, that's really kind of
Well,
what it boils down to.
well, first of all, let me say thank you for the work that you've done to make that happen. But also, I just want to acknowledge that the district attorney just was going for blood. I mean, she was irate that the
Yep.
judge ruled in that way. And, so often, the people in those positions don't understand anything about mental health and recovery. So one of the things that I tell the parents that I work with whose kids are facing criminal charges is to ask their attorneys or their public defenders to please um, ask the judge to rule in that way, to make them go to treatment, if they're first time offenders, for
Hmm.
sure, you know.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And you mentioned that you saw some signs and you admitted that you kind of ignored some of those signs as a mom.
Mhm.
Were there any other ways that you feel like your mothering kind of contributed to that situation?
1,000%. I was somebody who left home when she was 14 and had a lot of unresolved trauma, low self-worth, belief systems that I took on about my value. I mean, what parents let their kid move out of the house when they're 14 and don't try to stop them? I mean, what does that tell a kid about, how they're valued? And then on the other hand, think about this, if the great big bad world outside felt safer than living under the roof with my parents, that's a problem too, but I didn't go and get mental health care. Instead, I learned coping mechanisms that were not healthy. There was a lot of codependency in my relationships. The girl's dad left me for a woman 24 years younger than him. And ultimately, he became homeless. And so I was dealing with so much internal strife, a lot of anxiety, fear, and I was sharing my fear and anxiety and my challenges verbally with my daughters rather than going and getting mental health care that I needed, rather than doing the work that I needed to do. I mean, I did go to 12-step programs. I did work with a general therapist, and I just want to accent the general there because it's kind of like if you have cancer and you don't go to an oncologist, you're going to die. You know, pretty much. So if you're going to a general counselor that does not specifically treat the types of issues that I had, which was, trauma from childhood, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance use and codependency issues, if you're not working with somebody who specializes in that kind of stuff, you're not going to do well as you could. So here I am, I'm verbally sharing these things with my daughters, and how is a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old supposed to hold all of the weight of that parent? They don't have the ability to do that, and all they do is pick up on energetically your anxiety and your internal challenges, and it's way too much for a little person to hold. That's called parentification. I didn't know there was a word for it, where you actually sort of make your child responsible for your emotions, or it's actually known as emotional incest, as well, where a parent um, treats a child like they're an adult and emotionally depends on them. So I did that. I was that mom, and that caused a lot of internal stress for my daughter. So in addition to me doing that and her dad being homeless and she had experienced some sexual trauma when she was 4 years old, all of that combined, and me not getting her mental health care when she needed it because I didn't understand the importance of that, I guess. And I just thought I could, get through it, I guess, push forward without any tools that I needed. All of that, definitely contributed to her wanting to self-medicate. And that self-medication ultimately became a heroin addiction and everything that goes along with that.
Hmm. Well, speaking of that, your daughter was also involved in the Bling Ring celebrity burglaries that eventually became a documentary on Netflix. How did all of that magnify your struggle and your pain?
Well, interestingly, the documentary came out in 2023 in November.
Mm.
And prior to that, though, the burglaries and the addiction all happened between 2008 and 2010. And then in 2013, Sofia Coppola made a film about the Bling Ring called Bling Ring, where Emma Watson played my daughter and Leslie Mann played my character. And so that's when, like, we had so much public scrutiny and judgment, and we were, during the time of the burglaries, she was in the news a lot and on television, and obviously people knew us, and it was a nightmare. Very, very challenging to be in the public eye when you're going through that kind of stuff, especially back then. Even, substance use disorder was thought of as a choice, more like that's just bad behavior, and not really understood that it was a mental health issue and a disease. And yeah, so, but on the positive side, our journey, because of the publicity that it got, and then the Netflix documentary, which really shows how Alexis's recovery and my recovery, we've actually become experts in the field of mental health care and addiction recovery, and do a lot of work and help a lot of families and individuals. Alexis's treatment center with her husband in Malibu has been nominated by Newsweek 2 years in a row to being the #1 mental health and addiction treatment center in California. So that's been a huge, that came out of her trauma, right? So
Mhm.
thank God for all of that.
Mhm. And today, Alexis and her friend are both heroin free. They have their own children. Tell our audience about the healing and the renewal process.
Okay, so but from the time Alexis's friend was 4 years old, she sort of was a family member. She was more like an adopted child, a foster child, and a foster sister. And both of them, though, they got sober 2 years apart. Alexis got sober before her friend did, and I won't mention her friend's name, although it's not hard to find out by just going online. But so Alexis got sober because she had to for her criminal case, or she didn't have to, but chose to. And then her friend, it we had put her in treatment 5 different times. She left without, like she left against medical advice. And she was living, in downtown LA, 80 pounds at the most, and was really going to die if she didn't get help. And so we did what is known as a compassionate intervention. And that's where you don't ask them to give up the one thing that actually might have at one point been what saved their life. Sometimes substances actually, if you look at it, it's a strategy to deal with trauma that is so overwhelming. If you didn't have that substance, you might kill yourself, for instance. So the interventionist was like, you need to change your perspective about what this substance really is to this person, and stop judging them for it, and stop demanding that they give it up with before they have better strategies in any case, right? So we did this compassionate intervention, and within a couple of weeks, she said, okay, I'm ready. And she got sober without ever going back to treatment. She's been sober for 11 years. And what it took for each of them was acknowledging that they needed help, committing to doing whatever they felt they could commit to make that change for themselves to get sober, creating support systems. Each of them created their different support systems. Alexis got really involved in the sober community out here in California, and her friend moved back to the Midwest, where she found support groups and family there to support her. And both of them have had to do work. Sobriety is great, but the substance is not the issue. It's the underlying issues that cause somebody to want to self-medicate. And so if you don't go in and do the healing work in depth, you might relapse. You're going to be more likely to relapse if you don't address those underlying issues, and both of them have. And they've rebuilt relationships that, they burned in the past, but unfortunately or fortunately, they chose not to continue to stay in each other's lives.
Mm.
And that was the best, healthiest choice for them, because they were like fire and gasoline. They just blew shit up together. Excuse my French, but yeah. They were not good together. As much as I know they love each other and will always love each other, they just can't be close. And so, personal development, healing those old wounds, and knowing that recovery is an ongoing thing. You need to stay in your recovery program forever, I think. and just practice gratitude every day for every day of recovery, because life does get better when we get better.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that important lesson. I think hope and healing is certainly possible. It's come to your family, this hope and healing. And I think you've addressed some of this generational trauma, which I think is great. And now you're a trauma-informed life coach. You're specializing in family recovery and also relationships as well. And I think the common theme that we see in your work is connection. So, what are some of these healthy communication tools and strategies that you use in your work as a coach?
Well, certainly learning how to be a really good active listener as a family member, is critical. Again, looking at my own lack of active listening, we listen for behavior. We try to even listen for what's going on underneath the words our loved one is sharing. We try to understand. Um, there's different levels of listening, right? The first level of listening is like, oh, what can I say back that makes me right and them wrong? That's one form of listening. Another form of listening is, I really want to understand what this person is telling me. And then another form of listening is listening for the deeper unspoken words. And that's a skill set that takes time, but you can learn to listen at that level. And that's one of the most healing things we can do for each other. Then also learning nonviolent communication skills. Now, that Marshall Rosenberg is the founder of nonviolent communication, and it's one of the most beautiful practices. That includes watching your body language, your eye contact, your tone of voice, never using labels. Like, we don't talk about somebody being an addict. We talk about somebody who struggles with substance use disorder, because the labels create a sense of shame. And one of the things that we know is that shame registers in the same area of the brain that trauma does, and trauma causes people to want to self-medicate. So we want to do the best we can to use compassionate, kind, respectful communication, setting boundaries, for taking care of our own mental health and well-being, like knowing when you need a break, and trying to communicate that without shaming another person, saying, hey, I love you and I want to hear what you have to say, but I need a break. I'm going to take 5, or we can talk about this tomorrow, or I want to talk about this with a therapist present, or a third party present. So that's another thing. And then respecting somebody else's boundaries. If they say, I can't talk about this, um, you know, that's important to respect as well. And if you need help addressing an issue, go talk to a coach or a therapist first, and then figure out the best way to address it with your loved one, so that you can respect their boundary. Learning how to emotionally regulate. I mean, understanding that we have all these different voices in our head. Like, it's sometimes I might say, there's a part of me that really wants to yell at you right now. And then there's a part of me that really just wants to hold you in my arms. Those parts are equally loud inside of people's heads. And if one part is like really angry and screaming at the person that's in front of them, that's never going to be good for the relationship. So we want to learn how to identify, when we're feeling triggered, and what do I need to do to take care of my emotions so I don't, like, it's like handing that hot potato to somebody and saying, you hold it. We don't want to be that person. So that's one thing. And then learning about conflict resolution, and validating other people's feelings and avoiding minimalization of other people's feelings, because that's very shaming as well.
Mhm. Earlier, you talked about the compassionate intervention. I know that you have crisis management services as well that you offer. How are you able to support all of these families to navigate all of these intricacies of recovery?
That's really a good question. Well, first of all, having the experience of being the mother of, the sister of, and the wife of people who struggled, and living that experience myself, and then going through the training programs I've gone through, it's been really helpful. But the first thing I do is help families feel safe emotionally, to feel like each person gets time with me, to feel seen and heard and respected from their perspective of what's going on. There's no right or wrong. Everybody has their experience and needs to feel safe expressing their experience. So I provide that. And then each person has their own unique experience. So they also require a tailored type of support individually. Sometimes they say they don't need help, but the longer we work together, the more they become aware of that additional support might be necessary. So I help to create tailored support for each person and the family as a whole. If they are in crisis, in addition to providing advice and emotional support, I also provide resource connections for them with experts in the different areas that they might need support with. I help them learn those communication strategies so that they can end the conflict and create the connection with each other. Learning to build resilience inside of themselves by taking good care of their own well-being, mentally and emotionally. And I advocate for their needs with the different team members and treatment programs that they might be involved with. As long as I have the HIPAA rights to be involved, I sort of act as an intermediary between family members and treatment centers and family members and the identified patient.
Excellent. Well, this has been really, really informative. I'm really appreciative of the work that you do, and just kind of how it all turned out in the end. It's just really, I love hearing these stories because it just proves that hope and healing really is possible. We just have to give people an opportunity to get the treatment that they need, and then they're very successful from that point forward once they get the help that they need. And it is more possible now than ever before. There's so many options out there in terms of treatment. So excited for you and for your family and the work that you continue to do. Now, you do live in a beautiful part of the country, and I'm sure you know that to be true. And I love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. That is my weakness, is really good food. So
Okay.
the next time that I'm in the Malibu area, is there a place that I should go for a really great meal?
I would highly recommend the Sunset Restaurant in Malibu.
Okay.
It is right on the beach. It's across there's a little tiny road and you're right on the sand,
Yeah,
but you can watch the sunset from the second story. It has different rooms that have different vibes and the food is amazing. And, a lot of times you see celebrities there. It's a great hangout place. It's really fun.
I
And you
love
can wear
it.
anything from jeans and flip-flops to getting really dressed up. So that's fun too.
I love it. That's the perfect suggestion. It certainly is what I miss about some of the beaches out in the Hamptons and Long Island, where I'm originally from. So I know I would fit right in over there, and that sounds absolutely perfect. So I will check that out the next
Good.
time that I'm in Malibu. I can't wait.
Yay.
That sounds really good. All right. So if our listeners, this has been really great conversation. So if our listeners, if they want to bring you in to speak on their college campus, maybe they want to use your coaching services, where should they go in order to connect with you?
Okay, great. Well, so they can reach out to me on my email, which is Andrea at AndreaArlington.com. Or they can actually call me at 213-349-8414.
That is absolutely fantastic. Do you want to give your website address too?
Yes, it's AndreaArlington.com. Yeah,
Perfect.
and
All right.
I do have a downloadable video where my daughter Alexis and I give away some of the greatest communication tools that we have found have really created connection in our family. So that's always fun for people to be able to watch and apply to their own lives. So
That this has all been fantastic. I love that you're a resource for all of our college students, and I know they're going to be calling you and sending you emails. So I really appreciate all of that. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for sharing all this great information today.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you as well, Mike.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And to all of our listeners, if you found this conversation with Andrea to be helpful, I want you to like it and I want you to share it with other college students that really need to hear her words and get access to her resources. That is super, super important. So thank you so much for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much, and we're going to see you next time.